All right, guys. I'm Jesse, founder and head coach of Central Athlete. This is Stephen Fritsch. He is senior coach, and we are part of Central Athlete, which delivers personalized fitness and nutritional training programs to individuals all across the world. So what we're going to talk about today is why getting comprehensive labs is necessary to fine-tune and optimize your health and fitness experience. And to kind of preface this conversation, I believe that the majority of people get blood work. So it's a pretty standard thing that a lot of people are used to. But what they do is they utilize that for just this kind of clean bill of health. And it's really related to, do I have any diseases right now? I think there is a huge context with a functional interpretation of labs as it relates to health, nutritional, and lifestyle practices. So I wanted to open up a conversation about that today and how we have used and leveraged that and some of the things that we've seen in clinical experience.
Yeah, I think we can start if you want to describe what you mean by like a functional analysis. Like how is a functional analysis different from what you get from your MD?
Yeah, so I found this really interesting. So when you get your labs, it is less about health and it's more about a statistical argument of where you fit in. So for example, if I get my liver tested, right, we're going to test something called ALT or AST. These are liver enzymes that we're testing. One thing that I have noticed is that depending on where we're sending the labs off to, the specimens to what labs, or just what year we're in, I've noticed that these labs have started getting wider and wider and wider. So originally the cutoff was maybe 32 for AST and ALT, then it was 35. Now it's 40 to 42.
Really?
So it's kind of interesting that these reference ranges have gotten wider and wider and wider. So when I looked into this, turns out that about 95% of people will fit into what's considered normal, and then you have 2.5% low and high that are abnormal. And it's also really interesting too, because if I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I sent off my labs where everybody has a certain level of health, and then I went to Spokane, Washington, right? I could be healthy in Tulsa, but unhealthy when I sent off my labs to Spokane, Washington. So what a functional interpretation of labs is essentially saying before you're actually outside of these values where it's like, okay, now we have some sort of like liver thing going on. This is me waving a red flag. Yeah. We actually have pathology at the side of the liver. Yeah. We can say, okay, you're trending in the wrong direction. We're waving a yellow flag now. So let's have a conversation before this becomes problematic. Right. So this is having a conversation regarding proactive health versus kind of disease care, where we're now treating some sort of ailment that you have versus doing all the things to prevent you getting deeper into that dysfunction.
Right. And then you said a really good thing in there too of things are trending a certain way. And so I think that kind of hits on the point of, you always have these ranges that are different depending on where you live and what lab you send it to or whatever. But can you kind of touch on like why trends are more important than the actual value?
Yeah. So when you get your labs done, it is really just a snapshot in time. This is your testosterone today at 8:15 in the morning. This is your A1C. This is your blood glucose levels. These are your cholesterol. This is where you are today. Well, all of that can change given different sets of environments. So how much are you sleeping? What are you eating? What does your training look like? Do you have acute or a viral infection? All of these things can implicate where you are. So that's why one of the best things that we do is we're not doctors, but we do have an understanding of health and fitness and labs. And we for all of our clients who send this in and are part of this process is we track our clients' labs. And it's really interesting. You get 7 labs from 4 different years all across kind of a horizontal thing. And you can see how things are changing. So you can see, hey, back in 2019, your A1C, which is essentially the average of your blood glucose levels, was at 5, which is excellent. And we've noticed that each year it's gone up 0.2 points. And now in 2022, this actually happened with a client recently, it's 5.7. And now we're moving into a range where this individual is pre-diabetic. And so, if I just tested, a year ago and I'm like, oh, you're at 5.5. everything's good. But when you see that it's moved from 5 to 5.5, now it's 5.7, we know that this individual is doing something within their lifestyle and their dietary approach that's moving them away from optimal physiology. right?
Totally. Yeah. And I think another part of like the functional aspect is understanding like how all these different things work together, right? Like I feel like when a lot of people go and get labs, again, most people don't get labs because they feel super healthy, right? Like most people who get blood work, there's probably something going on. Most of the time sick people go to the doctor, right? And so I always feel like they're just looking at their cholesterol. They're just looking at triglycerides. They're just looking at testosterone. But, understanding, a functional analysis and understanding how all these things kind of connect together and, what systems affect certain values, I think is super powerful as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many nuances to that. So if we just pull out like testosterone, for example, there's a reference range. It changes lab to lab,
right,
but there's a reference range of 250 to 1100 nanograms per deciliter. And so, if I'm like 17 years old in the midst of puberty, like I want to be as high up there as possible. But then I can be, and this happens a lot. I had somebody's labs come back this week and they were in the low 400s as a, young, vital 30-year-old male. I mean, that's below the median. Mm-hmm. And, kind of understanding some of these nuances of like, what's your age? How old are you? What is your training load? What's your lifestyle look like? It'll paint a more compelling picture when we understand a lot of the aspects of the context around it.
Right. And furthermore, like getting routine blood work also feeds into that, right? Because 400 for that individual just might be normal, right? But 400 for me might be like drastically low, know? And so that's kind of where like having it done either quarterly or yearly or whatever is going to paint this like really, really good picture because you're going to find out what's your normal, you know what I mean? Like you might have 400 testosterone, 400 nanograms per deciliter, but like that just might be your normal, and if you feel good, like cool, like we'll get it to trend the other way. But, a lot of people would look at a 400 and be like, oh shit, like I need TRT, I need all this other stuff. And it's like, well, in reality, like that's who you are. And there's probably like lower hanging fruit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that it offers you the ability to do is test and retest. So if you come in and your testosterone was 424 and then we remove drinking, we add an additional hour of sleep. We give them really, really, really difficult central nervous stimulating exercises. And then, maybe we take a dietary and supplemental approach. And then in 3 months, he's begun this plan and he's doing it for 90 days and he comes back and retests. We can have an understanding of what happens there. And it's not just total testosterone, it's his free testosterone, it's his estradiol, it's his, various other things that we want to be looking at as well for this individual to see, kind of the overall health. One of the things I think people get into the misunderstanding of is kind of this Costco mentality. It's like if a little testosterone is good, then a lot is better, right? And so you see all these people taking all these herbs and all these things and trying to, or even like anabolics, and they try to push it as high as possible. And it's our belief that really, physiology should be operating within a pretty narrow balance for the most part, and that's interdependent on the individual. So what you were saying is very true. Is like if this person just is stable around 400 and they have good libido, good energy, good motivation, they recover from training, we don't need to talk about this that much because it doesn't seem to connect with the individual. But if it's 400 and they never get a boner, they're depressed, they can't make a decision to save their life, and they don't have big guns, well, let's have a conversation.
Right. And so I definitely think like this conversation around functional analysis of blood work is going to be something that keeps kind of coming up. But you've been doing this a long time, right? You've been getting your own blood work and you've been tracking it, and you've had a lot of really interesting experiences, I feel like. And so I think it'd be good for you to kind of share some of those. Like what kind of led you to start getting blood work? What kind of things did you notice? What changes were implemented? And then how are you kind of maintaining those things?
Yeah. Just like anybody else, I went to the doctor and it's always like, oh, you're healthy. And I would always look at all these things. I'm like WBC, RBC, MCV, A1C, like what, I don't know. This is so confusing. And it just says, okay, everything's good. Like if I paid this money, even if it's through insurance, I want to know what some of this means. So I got curious. And of course I'm 25 and I'm like, testosterone, that's important. Right. I want to get bigger, stronger. And so I went to my GP and I was like, hey, I want testosterone checked. I want my, lipids. I want A1C, electrolyte, like all these things, vitamin D. And he was like, whoa, you're a 25-year-old male without any pre-existing conditions. We'll just do total testosterone and normal labs. And I was like, whatever. When I got the labs back though, my testosterone was super low. It was in the low 400s. And I was like, what the hell? I'm eating right. I feel like I'm doing all the right things. And so it put me on this quest to really investigate, what is testosterone? What is A1C? Like, how does that impact our physiology? Like, what does it even mean? Mm-hmm. And over the course of years, I tracked all these values. I would notate when I did certain things, when I changed certain nutritional things, and I could see how this changed over time. And so one interesting thing that I did is in a matter, I think, of 28 days, I raised my testosterone from 424 to 666 with a very, very specific protocol that I did. So a lot of my experience has come in the form of just self-testing, and I'll learn things from that, and things that don't stick on the wall, I'm like, well, that was a waste of time and money. And then the things I learned that were valuable, I can pass that along to other people. And I think just the benefit of having the ability to test this and make it accessible and affordable is a really, really, really helpful thing to do. And being able to work with practitioners who are able to have a conversation about this in a knowledgeable way. We're not trying to diagnose like you're anemic or you've got gout or you're diabetic. That's not at all what we're trying to do. And that does come up, and we refer those people out to their GPs and whatnot. But what we can do is say, hey, you're obviously not doing a good job metabolizing carbohydrates. I've got this fancy little report to kind of show you that. Now, in the coach's head, we might already know that. We might already see the person, see how they respond to certain protocols, and already have that understanding kind of going in our brain. But when we have this set of labs and we can kind of show them this objective report, a lot of times it can kind of snap them into action, and it's a medium in which we are able to funnel that into behavior change.
Right. And so you've been using this in your own coaching practice for a long time, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I found some really, really interesting things. But most importantly, I've seen a lot of people really get bought into the process and get really interested in, like, it can feel meaningless after a certain point of like, oh, I just am getting my muscles bigger and bigger and bigger. But to actually be learning things in the process and feel like you're improving your physiology and doing all these specific things, I think it could be very meaningful for people to feel like they're learning and they're kind of progressing forward in a more like cerebral and intellectual format.
Yeah, and even from the coaching side of things, like that's our goal with all of our clients, right? To educate and to lead them toward more autonomy, right? So I think that's like a beautiful way to kind of like come full circle with what we try to do in health and fitness is like, again, like we as the coach can see and understand like, oh, I can see this person, how they respond to exercise, how they respond to certain protocols, but then you get those objective values back and you can really go, hey, like, no, you're really not metabolizing these carbs well at all. Like we need to shift toward more of this approach. And if they see that, they're gonna be like, oh shit, that's really cool.
Yeah, and so to kind of end this conversation, we just got some labs back from an individual. So we have a phlebotomist in-house. On Mondays, he draws labs from people. And so we had a client's labs come back, and this individual is wanting to go from 170 pounds to 200 pounds. He's kind of an intermediate trainee, still learning how to really intensely contract muscles, and he's got a lot of room in the gym to go. But he wants to gain 30 pounds of muscle. And originally, after working with him, one of the first things he talked about is kind of what I thought was some estrogen dominance going on. And we pulled some labs he already had, and he had an estrogenic profile. And that was in the form of like sore kind of, pecs and stuff like that, like nipples were sore. And over the time we worked on his metabolic system, that started to improve. That started to feed into the hormonal system. And so now I'm able to say, okay, we've worked on this for, about 6 months, improving your metabolic profile. You're more, insulin sensitive. You're starting to reduce adipose tissue. These are all great things. And I said, okay, now he got down to about 11% body fat. I said, okay, now it's time. We're going to start kind of gaining weight. He was kind of getting antsy in the process. We got labs tested, and he had this comment of like, I just keep storing, kind of fat here in the midsection. And we know that's more of like an insulin or cortisol site. And sure enough, insulin came back high, cortisol came back high. And that now has me second guessing or refining my strategy of like how I'm actually going to have this individual gain weight. I think he needs to work on his, his foundational aspects of his physiology before we do that, because you don't want to be 200 pounds with, it's not going to be a good look.
Right.
You know, if you do it the wrong way.
And then two, kind of feeding into that, like we know, excuse me, we know that if cortisol's high, you know, that's a stress hormone. So like that feeds into kind of the lifestyle stuff of like, we're not even talking about training. We're not even talking about nutrition. This person just needs to chill out every once in a while. And if this person chills out, it's going to bring that cortisol lower and it's not going to store so much body fat. But I think kind of the overall message here was like, labs are also not only a great way to kind of understand, you know, where your physiology lies. It's a great way to audit progress. You know, it's a great way to audit kind of where things are trending, you know, especially in this model where, you know, we have clients for a long period of time. You might try an intervention that in theory works, but with this individual, it might respond differently on their blood work. And now, now you don't have to like keep beating the dead horse. You can go, oh, okay. Obviously this was, you know, not the most optimal approach. So now let's kind of revisit this, you know, move on another prescription, retest labs, repeat.
All right, guys, thanks so much for listening today. If you are interested in gaining a bit more insight into your health and your physiology and having a professional coach take a look at your specific case, guys like Steven and myself would love to hop on a 30-minute call to get to know your story and see if there's any insight that we can give you. We offer free strategy sessions, and it's a great way to get a bit of insight into yourself.
Boom. Get your blood work done.